floor of the House of Representatives, where members have just voted to expel New York Republican George Santos from Congress. Expulsions from the House are extremely rare. This is just the 6th time in history of the American democracy and the 3rd time since the Civil War that a member has been removed from office by their fellow lawmakers. Santos has survived 2 prior efforts to drive him from Congress. But 2 weeks ago, the House Ethics Committee, led by a fellow Republican, released a scathing report saying that there is clear evidence that Santos blatantly stole money from his campaign and deceived donors. The committee referred its findings to federal prosecutors, though Santos was already indicted by the Department of Justice earlier this year. He currently faces 23 federal charges, including but not limited to wire fraud, false statements, and aggravated identity theft. He has pleaded not guilty. Congressional correspondent Nicole Killian is on Capitol Hill. Nicole, now Santos's tenure from the beginning has been filled with drama down to the very last moment. Tell us about the shifting of the winds this morning and his eventual expulsion.
Yes, well, this all started before Santos even came to Capitol Hill. Of course, there were all these accusations that he had embellished his resume, committed a number of falsehoods and stated lies before he even got to Congress. And then once he got here, of course, as you mentioned, he was indicted with 13 counts, followed by 10 counts later this year. All of this sparked an ethics investigation that ultimately found substantial evidence of wrongdoing and potentially allegations that the congressman may have violated the law, and that he used campaign funds for his own personal expenses for things like Botox and designer goods and resort trips. The congressman multiple times in asking him to defend some of those findings, that he would address it at a later time. He continues to insist that he will have his day in court, but now he is no longer a member of this body, as House Republicans overwhelmingly voted to, and Democrats voted to overwhelmingly expel him today. This is the 3rd attempt to try to remove him from Congress. There was just an expulsion vote last month, which failed, but today it is now successful. And the speaker coming here just now. Speaker.
I'm going to make one statement. It's been over a month since the House passed our bipartisan support package for Israel. It has been sitting on the Senate desks over there for over a month. It's time for them to take action on that matter. It's critically important to our ally, and stop trying to condition it and add it to other things. So we're admonishing the Senate to do their job, to get that very important piece of legislation passed. And that's the only comment I'm going to provide.
Mr. Speaker, what does this expulsion mean for your majority, sir? What does it mean for your majority? Okay, so you heard there that the speaker, of course, not really addressing the matter at hand in terms of Congressman Santos's expulsion, but this does reduce Republicans a majority by 1 vote. They already had a narrow majority, so this makes things even tougher when it comes to passing legislation in this body. Of course, there will likely have to be a special election to fill this seat. It's a swing district, so certainly Democrats are gunning for it as much as Republicans. Adriana.
Thank you, Nicole. That's right. That razor-thin majority now shaved a little thinner. We want to bring in our chief election and campaign correspondent, Robert Costa. Bob, thanks so much for being here. So a lot of the opposition to expelling Santos revolved around precedent. This morning, House GOP leadership said that they would not vote to expel him. What is the precedent concern, and how did that really come into play here?
Sometimes a picture or a hallway interaction says 1,000 words, and Nicole's terrific reporting just there with Speaker Mike Johnson really indicates where House Republicans were. They want to move on to other issues. They want to stop talking about Congressman George Santos. But you had the House leadership this morning on the Republican side come out and say, we're not going to support expelling him. He hasn't been convicted of a crime yet. The Ethics Committee has its investigation and its conclusion, but they believe this is a Democratic-propelled initiative, and they didn't want to have their fingerprints on it. That said, they didn't lean on members. They didn't whip members to take the same position they were. So ultimately, Santos is expelled. The House leadership doesn't have its fingerprints on that decision, but this problem, this headache for them, it's now gone. And that's really what Speaker Johnson, based on my conversations with his allies, wants. He wants to get Santos off the radar, but he doesn't want to be seen as pushing him out the door.
They want to get back to governing. Bob Costa, thank you so much. We also have some breaking news from the Supreme Court, some very sad news. Retired Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman to serve on the highest court in the land, died this morning in Phoenix. She was 93 years old. O'Connor played a crucial role in the ideological center of the court during her quarter century as a justice. CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford joins us on the phone. And beyond being the first woman on the court, she leaves a tremendous legacy, doesn't she, Jan?
Well, sure. I mean, you know, trailblazer really is, she's the definition of that word. It's the first female justice. She was a politician before she became a justice. So she was also the first majority leader in any state in the country. But she was an independent, moderate conservative. The principles of self-reliance and pragmatism that she learned growing up on the Lazy D cattle ranch in Arizona really shaped her throughout her career. And as that moderate conservative, I don't think you can understate the impact that she had on the law and on the court. I mean, she was the key fifth vote to uphold Roe versus Wade, to preserve affirmative action. But also, you know, as a conservative, she provided the fifth vote in Bush versus Gore. And that case really showed her impact on the court because her pragmatic views, her approach was very much, that was the decision today, let's move on. And so she was able to kind of bring her justice, her fellow justices together. She was very much the glue. I mean, there were so many different opinions and personalities in that court of nine. And O'Connor was such an important role in terms of the relationships that the justices had with one another beyond the impact, the great impact that she had on the law. Now, of course, she was replaced by conservative Justice Sam Alito, and he has taken the court in a very different direction. In fact, writing the opinion to overturn Roe versus Wade.
Jan, that's right. She was the glue, organizing social events to make sure that her colleagues stayed connected. Admitted to Stanford at 16 years old, finished law school in 2 years, not 3, a trailblazer who inspired so many women and men to enter law. Jan Crawford, thank you so much. Our coverage of both of these breaking news stories will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and tonight, of course, on the CBS Evening News. This has been a special report. I'm Adriana Diaz in Washington.
Well, you just heard the breaking news now. An extremely rare move. House lawmakers have voted to expel Congressman George Santos from Congress. The New York Republican is the first member of Congress ever removed without being convicted of a crime. He pointed that out the other day, though he does face a number of charges, 23 federal charges. Earlier, we saw Santos get into a car and leave Capitol Hill. We also heard from House Speaker Mike Johnson, who declined to speak about Santos's expulsion. But this move means that the Republicans have one fewer vote in their very thin majority. So Nicole Killian is on Capitol Hill. She's been following all of the drama for us. Nicole, so this was pretty much expected. There were 2 expulsion votes before. They needed a 2/3 majority, and the expectation was that they had enough votes, and they certainly did.
Yeah, they did. But, you know, there was some drama all the way up until this vote because Republicans had a conference meeting this morning where many members came out saying that this could be a close vote. All of the Republican leaders came out in opposition to this expulsion resolution. Speaker Johnson, Majority Leader Steve Scalise, GOP Whip Tom Emmer, and GOP Conference Chair Elise Stefanik. So it looked like it was possible that he could have been saved because those leaders were coming out, even though they said they were not going to whip this vote and they were going to let members vote their conscience. And apparently they did because, again, the congressman, no longer a congressman, was expelled in pretty short order and pretty decisively with well over 300 votes, which is a sizable change from what we saw with the last expulsion vote just a month ago, which failed with only 179 lawmakers supporting this. Again, this time now that threshold was well over 300. Of course, a threshold much higher for expulsion because it requires that 2/3 majority vote. And now Santos has officially left the chamber and will now have to move on to life as a former expelled congressman.
So that's what we expect Santos to be up to. But what happens now in the House? What happens to that vacant seat, Nicole?
Well, Exactly that. I mean, the office will be vacant. The House clerk will take over managing that office, although Santos's staffers are welcome to stay on board and continue working in their capacity serving the 3rd Congressional District of New York. But for the time being, it will only be there to kind of provide constituent services. Obviously, it can engage in any kind of legislative activity, and a special election ultimately will have to be held. So the clerk's office will notify the governor of New York, who will then have to call for a special election. We already know that a number of both Democrats and Republicans are already running for this seat in 2024. So it'll be interesting to see if any of them decide to jump in, for instance, to the special election when and if it is called. But for the meantime, there is no representative for the 3rd Congressional District of New York.
Let me ask you, Nicole, you know, he did a press briefing yesterday where he basically suggested he had receipts on other lawmakers that he was going to divulge. Did he give any indication just what he was talking about, or is just kind of a lot of bluster?
Well, you know, he did introduce an expulsion resolution on the floor yesterday afternoon against Congressman Jamal Bowman, who pleaded guilty to pulling the fire alarm a couple of months back during a vote over government funding, which shut down a House office building at the time. But Bowman dismissed that as a meaningless stunt. But, you know, Santos really was arguing that he believed that there should be some due process, that he didn't feel that his colleagues should be the judge, jury, and executioner, in his words. He claims that he did cooperate with the ethics panel, although they said that he never at any point sat down with them, did not provide a statement. You know, Santos, for his part, said some of that was due to scheduling issues, particularly around some of his court appearances. But look, this was a very tumultuous tenure for the Long Island congressman. Of course, he came into this Congress under the specter of, you know, issuing a number of lies about his background, embellishing his resume. Then, of course, he was indicted earlier this spring on 13 federal counts. 10 more were added this fall. These charges range from money laundering to wire fraud, lying to the Federal Election Commission. Santos telling me after that second round of charges that he didn't even know anything about the Federal Election Commission. And then you have this scathing ethics report, which dropped just a couple of weeks ago, which found substantial evidence of potential wrongdoing, alleging that Santos deceived his donors, stole blatantly from his campaign, used some of that money for his own personal expenses on things like Botox and, you know, designer goods. And when we asked the congressman this week to defend some of those allegations, he said he would do that at a later time. But many members argue that there was enough evidence in that report for them to support expulsion, which could potentially be one of the reasons why this vote was so overwhelming today.
Right, Nicole, thank you very much. You want to take everyone over to the steps just outside. Congressman Jamie Raskin is speaking right now. Let's dip in.
His leadership, if they can take on George Santos, they should be able to take on Donald Trump.
We've heard a lot that sets a dangerous precedent. What would you tell your Republican colleagues who say that this sets a dangerous precedent?
Well, I was the one who argued that it set a dangerous precedent when they tried to expel him a month ago, because there was neither a criminal conviction nor any conclusion of Congress's own ethics process. Now we have a conclusion in the ethics process and a series of findings that George Santos had stolen people's money, used it for vacations to go to Las Vegas, used it for Botox, used it for personal purposes. Now, where did he get the idea that you can lie to the public about significant things and cheat and steal? Got it from Donald Trump, who's the leader of their party. So I just want to know if they're going to use the George Santos test for Donald Trump.
On the precedent question,
yeah.
Do you think we're actually going to now see more common expulsions, or is Santos just an extraordinary case here?
Well, I believe if you could divine any common law principles emerging from this sequence of motions against him, it's that the House will not vote to expel somebody without a criminal conviction or without an ethics process conclusion that a person engaged in serious misconduct against the public interest and against the law. And that's certainly why I voted the way that I did. I hope that the Republicans who decided that George Santos was no longer a convenient member of their caucus will use the same standards against Donald Trump, who's already been found guilty of fraud, civil fraud in New York, and has already been found guilty of sexually assaulting a woman and then defaming her. That's not even to get into the 4 existing federal and state prosecutions with 91 different felony counts that he's facing all over the country. Can you get any of those Republicans who just voted to expel George Santos to say that they will oppose Donald Trump and try to block his return to office?
Do you think Republicans will be able to hold on to that seat in New York?
I have no idea about the politics of it. I hope Republicans are not able to hang on to any seat if they continue to stand by Donald Trump, who is a threat to the continued vitality of the Republic.
Congressman, how do you vote on this expulsion? Republicans are still trying to get Hunter Biden to testify behind closed doors, of course, with the impeachment inquiry.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, well, not the impeachment inquiry, to the investigation. So I'm just wondering, what's your response to them? They commented on your criticism of that, saying that, well, this was also this same standard that other witnesses were held to when they were sought to testify under the January 6th investigation.
Yeah. All right, well, let's start with this. You know, they're like Ahab and the Great White Whale and Moby Dick. They've been chasing Hunter Biden for 10 months, alleging some shadowy, sinister family conspiracy. They have produced no evidence for it, no proof for it. Their own expert witnesses at their first big impeachment hearing rejected the idea that Joe Biden had engaged in any criminal conduct, much less impeachable conduct. And then they went ahead and they subpoenaed Hunter Biden to come in, and Hunter Biden said, yes, I will come in and I will testify before the entire world. I will subject myself to all of your questions. You set up the process as you see fit. Chairman Comer immediately said, no, we don't want that. He said it won't work with the 5-minute format. He's not bound by the 5-minute format. He can set up whatever process he wants. He controls the committee. The majority controls the committee. If they want to have lawyers asking questions, that's been done before. They can have lawyers asking questions. He can do it however he wants. Now, is it different from what happened with Steve Bannon, for example? And you're asking the right guy, because I brought the contempt motion against Steve Bannon to the floor of the House of Representatives. Steve Bannon did not even respond to our subpoena. He was 9 months in violation of our subpoena, and we held him in contempt. And then finally...
All right, Congressman Jamie Raskin there took a pivot from talking about the expulsion of George Santos to the Republican-led impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden and his business dealings with his son Hunter Biden. Let's go back quickly to Nicole Killian for some final thoughts. Nicole, pretty historic day on Capitol Hill.
Absolutely. I mean, this is only the 6th time in U.S. history that this has happened. Initially, the first 3 times were during the Civil War, where you had members fighting for the Confederacy and expelled for that. And then most recently, in the 80s and then again in the early 2000s, we saw 2 other members expelled for criminal conduct and convictions. So Santos now makes the 6th. And, you know, it does raise a question, as Congressman Raskin was asked there briefly, whether or not this raises a specter for future expulsion votes in the future. You know, there is, even though this vote was successful, still some real concerns about the precedent that this might set going forward. We have already seen, for instance, with censure votes, many of those occurring with more frequency given the hyper-partisanship and dynamics and frustrations here in Congress. So will expulsion be used as a tool more in light of this Santos vote? That is something that remains to be seen, but clearly he was bogged down with a lot of legal troubles from this indictment, from those findings in the ethics report, which again many members felt was enough grounds and due process to remove Santos today.
All right, Nicole Killian for us, doing the incredible work of looking into what is happening there on the Hill and getting reaction from members of Congress. Nicole, you've been a trooper. We appreciate you as always.
You bet.
All right, former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, the court's first female justice, has died at the age of 93.
CBS News chief legal correspondent Jen Crawford has a look at her life and legacy.
It's all right to be the first to do something, but I didn't want to be the last woman on the Supreme Court.
That was part of the pressure of being the historic first, a trail Sandra Day O'Connor blazed more than once.
The nomination of Judge Sandra Day